And some other people helped us too, and thank you very much, because last time we came to town, we did a media tour. We told the newspapers, we told the radio, you know, and some of them told you, and actually they screwed it around, they got it wrong. But you know, this time I says, there's got to be people in Seattle that know other people in Seattle, and so we, you know, got hooked up with some groups here, and it's heartening to see this. It's heartening to see this, because this is what it's going to take. It's going to take people. Okay, it's going to take people understanding how we got in the mess we are. Okay, and then we have to stand up, be human beings, stand on our own 2 feet, and we can have the country that our forefathers gave us. Okay, because we definitely don't have it now. And so, I'm not going to take a lot of time. Basically, my name's Chris Milligan. I'm a publisher. And it just happened. And, you know, we've got, you know, over 60 books now that the suppression of information and news in this country is just huge. Okay? I mean, if everything was everything, okay, this silly hippie in Oregon wouldn't be publishing her book. Her book is very important. What she has to tell about history is very important. It should be coming out from New York, okay? But it's not. So we all have a job to do, okay? And that's to learn and then to stand up. So I'm not going to take much more time. And a good friend of Judy, Dr. John Williams here, is going to talk a little bit about JFK. He's gone to a lot of the conferences and become a friend of Judy's on Facebook. And again, I really appreciate you all being here, and thank you very much.
Okay, my name is John Williams, and I had never written any music. Okay, although people ask me, and I usually say yes, I like my work. And anyway, I taught at a university in North Dakota for 43 years. I taught statistics and a course in psychology. And about 15 years ago, I ran into Judyth, who was actually in JFK research. And I was kind of fascinated with the things that she had done. And I'd already done some things in the JFK area. Anyway, we started correspondence, and we've done a couple of articles together. And but some of the things that I've done that maybe she won't tell you too much about. Because I wrote articles about JFK, I often would get telephone calls or letters from people. And this fellow called me from Mobile, Alabama, and he had an interesting story. There was a couple events that happened. One was the 17th of November, 1963, when it appears that Harvey Oswald sent a telegram to the FBI in New Orleans saying that there would be an attempt on the life of President Kennedy either the 21st or 22nd of February in Dallas.
February?
I'm sorry, in November. Yes, I get the right one.
He's getting mixed up with David Ferry, who died in February.
Well, I can get mixed up with him. But that was on the 17th of... and the telegram, by the way, they denied that it was ever found, except that the guy who received it made copies, or he actually copied it on teletype. And actually, I have a copy of it right here. But then, on the 21st of November, my friend, whose name is Junior Moore, who was in a pool hall, and the FBI came, and they said, "You've got to come with us." And they took him to the FBI offices there in Mobile. And they said, okay, tell us what you know about Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, I have to stop here. The FBI, until after the assassination, never admitted they ever knew anything about Lee Harvey Oswald. But the day before the assassination, this fellow was brought into the FBI offices in Mobile. And he had no idea who they were talking about. Actually, Oswald had been in Mobile the previous summer when he gave a lecture at a college then. And so anyhow, he went back, started playing pool again. And then the next day, his friends asked him, what did the FBI want to know about? And he says, they asked me about some guy named Lee Harvey Oswald. I had no idea who they were talking about. And then the next day, he was playing pool again. He was pretty good at that. And they announced on television that Lee Harvey Oswald was a suspect. And everybody looked at him and says, isn't that the guy they were asking you about yesterday? He says, yeah, it is. Well, that gives you just a sense of, there's a bit of lack of truth with some of our government agencies. And they disclaim knowing anything about it when they have fairly lengthy dossiers on it. Some other things. I also, I don't know if you know who John Armstrong is. Yeah. Just a little. But anyway, he was doing research, and he asked me and another friend of mine, his name is Gary Severson, to do some things in North Dakota, which is where I was at. So the first of which was I was supposed to look for a driver's license for a guy named Don Norton, and I had contacts. One of my former students was superintendent of public instructions in North Dakota, so he got all the stuff done. They could find no evidence that was ever anybody with that driver's license, which I reported back. And then we went to a town where Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly had been during the summer, I believe it was 1953 or 54, I'm not sure. There were actually there were several FBI reports about him being there. And so we went to, it's kind of funny, we went to this town, and we interviewed people who were, one was the publisher of the paper then, another was the mayor, and the guy who was the prosecutor for the county. And so we talked to the mayor, and they talked about the FBI coming in, and they basically verified all of that. And then I talked to the guy who used to run the paper, and he verified all that. Then we went to the state's attorney, and he said, no, there was no FBI here. If there would have been, I would have been told. And I thought I could tell him what I just heard from these other two guys. He was as old then as I am now, and I thought I didn't want to embarrass him, so I didn't say it. But it is just interesting, the things that you can run into. What I'd like to do is I'd like to answer any questions you have, if I can. I've done a lot of things in a lot of different areas. By the way, the first time I went to Dealey Plaza, let's see, yeah, probably works. My wife and I went there in 1980, and I got there and I looked at where it had never dawned on me that the Texas School Book Depository wasn't on Elm Street. It was on a different street. There was maybe 50 feet away. And I thought, Lord, I couldn't shop like anything like that. But in any event, I was really surprised by the layout of the land, which was very different than what I expected. I guess what I would do is if you have any questions, I would entertain them and possibly answer them. So I would open it to that, and then we'll get on to Judyth, who's the main event.
Judyth first.
So, any questions? Yes.
Yes, I read recently that the files of the original Warren Commission won't be released until 75 years. And I want to know why, I want to know why they don't want to release the files. Because I grew up in the 60s, but I was a little bit different. I always believed that Harvey Oswald was innocent, and it cost me jobs and everything. But I believe release the files and the truth is known, but apparently they want everybody to know.
Yeah.
The other generation to know. So let's
Yeah, when we, finally get the information out that they were lying to us, they'll all be dead. That's one answer.
Please put the mic closer.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a microphone, not a...
Closer.
The other gray hair in the room.
Yeah, it's kind of like... Oh, like that.
Way a microphone.
Oh, okay. As you can see, I barely use microphones, I just yell. But some of those files actually have been released through the ARRB. That was the Assassination Record Review Board. We actually had a conference where the fellow that was the director of that spoke, as well as several other people. And but there have been there's some records that have not been released, and the why, I think, is to avoid embarrassment. I notice people have 12s or 25s on. I think I understand reasons for both. 12th man, 25 was the defensive back. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think it's to avoid embarrassment, and hopefully, it's kind of like we finally admitted that Columbus didn't discover America. He was using good maps, and but the land grants remained legal, and they were done under the idea that this is the first discovery, which would mean that the first Indian who went to Europe was making a first discovery as well, and maybe they could give land grants too. Yeah.
Oh, no, I was just scratching.
Oh, scratch. Okay.
I'm going to offer another suggestion, because I really seriously doubt those records have thoroughly cleansed.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm going to say that if you're going to play a shell game with people and if you want them to look in a certain direction, glue down the shell with the nut under it. Just glue it down. If they're not allowed to look under it, they're going to assume that's where it is, where in fact they don't be there at all. In other words, by closing up the records, it just keeps people looking somewhere where there is nothing.
Though, it's kind of interesting. They have released records that later on they realized we should not have released this because they've actually released some important records.
If you stop and think about the Kennedy assassination, Matt, the news media has been very involved for a long time in covering it up.
Oh, yeah.
News out. And in fact, the reasons why he was killed remain a secret from the public, and they're very obvious to people who look at it. Just for some reason, that the salute is never mentioned. And I'm going to suggest that all of the information that governs the Kennedy assassination is not in the United States. It isn't the people that are involved. It's something much bigger. Because how could they guarantee that the news media continues to tell the big and continues to push, all kinds of conspiracy theories that aren't true, disinformation everywhere. So it's something bigger than the United States.
Actually, I told you I lived in North Dakota. One of the things happened to us in North Dakota is that we got a lot of our news from Canada. And the news we got from Canada is a lot different than the news you get from the United States. And also I don't know if many of you might have seen The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
Yeah.
That was produced by a fellow from England. And it was shown in England long before it was shown in the United States.
Yeah.
And
It played here. It played here in Seattle.
I've never seen this or heard it. I don't know what The Man Who Killed Kennedy.
The Men Who Killed Kennedy. It was nine
parts.
Series of 9 one-hour programs. Actually, number 8 was about Judyth. The number 9 was about the involvement, possible involvement of LBJ. And that particular year, I had been at the Dallas conference when they were shown, and I got home on the 25th of November. It was too late to order them; they were already verboten. And but a friend of mine had copied them from the television, so this verboten stuff I showed in my classes until I retired.
I guess the real question comes down to how could anybody who actually was involved in killing Kennedy then control the media to cover it up? In other words, it was under the orders of somebody higher in the organization, the order of how things were constructed.
Well, part of it is money. And also, you might, with newspapers, they've been consolidated. There aren't too many, like Night Riders, like 20 different city newspapers.
Who controls those? Who controls the media?
Very few people.
Yeah, but who are they? How do you identify? I'm not asking names now. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not asking names. I'm saying what's the interest? How are they kept organized? I mean, I will tell you that it's the major investment.
Well, if you get out of line, you're fired. That's one way. Either newspapers or.
I'm going to suggest that the mass media is pretty much controlled by the investment banks that own it.
Probably.
And they have a very common interest, and that interest is in facilitating commerce. That's what investment banks are. And that if Kennedy was somebody who got in the way of commerce, who was actually a threat to the existing order of that commerce, he would be somebody who actually got rid of it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes, that's right. Well, I think that's exactly true. And in fact, I think that the fact that that doesn't ever come out, that we never discuss that interest, we never grow to understand it, is proof that interest controls our media. And
we have another question. We should go.
This is all well and good. You came here in Judyth.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's turn it over to Judyth right now.
Thanks.
Hi. Can you hear me with this? Is it okay? All right. God bless you all. It's not easy to... I'm not here to talk tonight about who killed Kennedy necessarily, but I can tell you who didn't. Not only that, I can tell you why a man who was an innocent man was, brought to the condition he was brought to. First of all, I'd like to have a raise of hands here. How many of you believe in the Warren Commission was telling the truth? Come on, raise your hand so I can find the troll. Okay. One troll, I call them trolls, one time I was speaking and this man kept interrupting and all that. I came down from the podium and I talked to him and I said, you can talk to them all day long. I'm here today. And I'm here, actually, it has been a cost for me, a price. Tell me what price you've paid to interrupt me. Late Harvey Oswald was an innocent man, but more than that, he was a hero. And we've been working a long time on this, but for the first time in New Orleans, we're going to have a party on the 18th of October, a public party celebrating his 75th birthday in New Orleans, and we expect to have a lot of people there. That's how things have changed, especially in New Orleans. I have so many emails from people who said, I lived there, I was back in that time, I know you're telling the truth, I know some of the people you've written about in the book. Interestingly enough, the Garners and the Eames, who lived next door to Lee, the Garners actually ran the boarding apartment building that Lee was in. The Eameses owned it, they were next door. And I've talked to both their families, and they wanted to know whether it was a real thing, and I get that all the time. And what's interesting is that I was able to describe the backyard and the biggest piece of furniture that was left behind, for example, in Lee's apartment, which nobody knew about, but I did, because I was in there. And at that time I wasn't inside. Lee told me about what was brought in by his uncle. And, great big cabinet, and he could lock it and put his stuff in there. I have had the privilege of meeting, after many years, some of the witnesses I had that I thought were dead. Most of them were dead. A few of them survived. One of them, like Anna Lewis, her husband is David Lewis, Lee and I, and David, and Anna, we walked along the sides of the Mississippi River. He sat down and started kissing his wife, and Lee's married, and I'm married, and we're looking at each other, and we don't like who we were married to. And then Lee puts out his little transistor radio, and it starts playing Let It Be Me by the Everly Brothers. And I fell in love, and never stopped loving him ever since, and that's why I'm fighting for his vindication. And I'll fight to the end. Now, there are many things I could talk about, but I'd like to start with just one question. Somebody raise your hand with a pertinent question. We'll start from there. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about what a handler is? In the end of the first book, you talked about how you and
Yes.
you were very upset about finding that David Lee was a handler, and I kind of got the impression that Lee might have been assigned to be your handler. And
It says that in the book.
And I just was
It's right in me and Lee. See, I remember everything Lee ever told me, and let me explain why I can remember these things and why I saved what I did. When I realized that I was in a project to help try to kill Fidel Castro, that was history. That's why I started saving things. And then when Lee and I realized that Lee was getting involved with people that might be interested in killing Kennedy, I started saving things about Lee. And every year I went across all the things I could remember that he ever said. Because he was wiped out, but he told me, please tell my kids, tell my little girls, the way he put it, that I was a good guy. And handlers are basically in CIA. They're used, often the person being handled doesn't know they're being handled. And sometimes they don't know the name. Now, Lee was handled by George de Mordschildt to start with, but he was transferred to Haiti. And I could tell you, I could prove to you why Lee Oswald did not shoot at General Walker. I could show you a file here, and I might have time, I don't know. But basically, Lee, when researchers asked me, did Lee Oswald ask you or tell you anything about the General Walker shooting, or about General Walker, I said no. Because that's the way my literal mind works. I was scientifically trained. But he did tell me about the problems it caused him because General Walker was shot at. A lot of people don't know this, and I've tried to get it out there. Lee, his handler at that time was George de Mordschildt. He was asked only a few days after General Walker was shot at to stand right there in the middle of Dallas on their main street with a Viva Castro sign around his neck and hand out fair play for Cuba pamphlets. He did it first in Dallas. How many of you knew that? Well, we have newspaper records for it. Okay, some of you did, or maybe some of you read the book and you remember that. And Lee said the police saw him, he had to run in. He said, he called George de Mordschildt, it was Sunday, Easter Sunday, okay? And he said, you've got to come over here. So de Mordschildt and his wife come over. Now, anytime you're going to make a visit, this is the way they do it. Even though it's 10 o'clock at night on Easter Sunday, they come over with a bunny, a stuffed bunny for the baby, okay? Yeah, right, that's why they're really there, right, at 10 o'clock at night, all right?
Yeah.
But that's what they do, even that little tiny detail. Oh, we were just there because we went to deliver a bunny rabbit at 10 o'clock at night, right? No, he's there because Lee said, look, I'm not going to be any good. The police have, suspect me. He implied to me that he may have even been arrested and then let go. But he said, they're going to connect me with the Walker thing. I want out of here. A week later, he is transferred to New Orleans. All right? There, he can work on things like that at a certain point. But in the beginning, he worked with Guy Bannister, FBI, Honcho at one time, in charge of 500 Chicago agents. Think about that. And this man is now in New Orleans. He's in a building I call it the Bannister Building, but the Warren Commission doesn't want you to know that. The Warren Commission calls it the Newman Building from the man who bought it after Bannister moved in. Everybody called it the Bannister Building at the time. But no, and then of course they ripped it down as fast as they could. That building, if you could see it, you have a back entrance here, and that's all banisters on the first floor going up to the second floor. And it goes halfway up the building, and then you see air conditioners here. Well, that's where Mancuso's was. And I went in there with Lee all the time. I mean, not all the time, often. You can see it in the book. And Lee sat in there and had coffee with David Lewis and Jack Martin and so on. The people you may not know, but what I'm saying, they're trying to tell us this man who was in charge of over 500 agents in Chicago wasn't aware that Lee Oswald got an office on the second floor, for which I have provided evidence showing that it was that he asked to buy an American Express money order. He had written on the 26th, on the 26th of May to the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and said, I'm going to get an office for $30. The next day he asked me, and I'm going through my purse looking for the money. He said, I can't do this because I'm supposed to not have any money. It has to look like a donation, so he gets $30 from me. And then, of course, the next day I have the bank deposits that I put the money in my bank account. Now, I don't know how many people go ahead and buy a money order and then put the money back, put the money into the bank account instead of just putting the money straight in. So, I mean, I've got a lot of peripheral records like that. Anyway, Lee was handled at that time by George and Warren Schill, who went to Haiti. And so Lee was handed over to somebody called Mr. B. And this Mr. B was in a hurry, and Lee wasn't that important in some ways because Mr. B one time told him his name was Benton, another time Benson, all right, and finally Bishop. And that's when we caught him. Because when Lee met him, at the same time, Antonio Veciana, who was an assassin, an anti-Castro assassin, very important guy with Alpha 66, a bunch of people who wanted to kill Castro. Lee Oswald was there with David Atlee Phillips and Veciana, and he is not supposed to be there if he's pro-Castro, is he? But that's because he's ours, and he was a spy. He did the same thing when he was in the USSR. He was a spy for us. I was so impressed. When I was just, when I was a young girl still in high school, I met a man who was a spy for in Hitler's reign, and he was a Norwegian, and this person really impressed me a great deal. When I met Lee, I understood a lot about some certain terms because of my interest in spies. I'd read Ian Fleming's books just like Lee had. I spoke Russian just like Lee did, and not as well as he. He was the best. Lee Oswald entered the USSR, and he did it. He said his goal was to get in before he was no longer a teenager, and he made it by 2 days. He was still 19 years old when he entered it. He said that was one of his great joys in life, that he had made that trip into the Soviet Union and entered and was able to stay. Of course, he had to cut his wrist, his left wrist, to do it and stay. They wanted to deport him right out. It's kind of embarrassing to go and deport somebody who would rather kill themselves than return to the United States, right? Lee told me that Rima, the person who was his guide there at the USSR, there in Moscow, to come at a certain time, and she was a half an hour late. He almost died because she didn't come in time. Then they had the door locked. They kicked the door in and found him, half dead, and hauled him off. And so we have all these interesting things that happen. He's in there almost 3 years. Scenario number 1. Now consider this. Let's fast forward to today. And all of you know what drones are in the drone program. It'd be nice to be able to figure out how to shoot down a drone. If you're somebody in Pakistan, or you're in Iran, or if you're in Syria. Now imagine if Lee Oswald lived today and he went to the U.S. Embassy in Iraq and said, throws down his passport, says, I'm going to go and tell all the Syrians about how to, because I was in the drone program, I know how it works, I'm going to tell them, all of them, how to shoot down your drones. So, you know, bye-bye. You think they'd let him out of the building? Come on. Who thinks they're going to let him out of the building? Do you think at the height of the Cold War, there goes somebody's glasses, sorry. Do you think that during the height of the Cold War that Lee Oswald actually went up into the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, threw his passport down, said, I'm defecting, I'm giving up my citizenship. Oh, and by the way, he says, I'm going to tell everybody about the U-2. I'm going to tell Soviets everything I know. Do you really think they would have let him out of that room? They not only let him out, they let him back in. Gave him his passport back, gave him a loan, and when you look at all the documents, which I have about the loan, probably none of you have ever looked at those documents, but I knew what Lee had done and found the documents, and they're available. And there it says that you have to be a citizen in good standing in the United States, and you're not a subversive, and you know, you're not anybody that's suspicious. And it's all signed by the State Department and everything. He gets his loan, comes back to the United States, is debriefed, but nobody says anything. He's debriefed. He loses several suitcases before he makes it to Texas. They're left behind somewhere, okay, like in New York. And Lee Oswald's not arrested, even though some other defectors, so-called, were arrested. We have Lee Oswald standing out there handing out pro-Castro stuff, FPCC, and the police arrest him, and he says, tell the FBI that you've arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, and the FBI comes over and talks to him for an hour and a half on a Saturday, when usually the office is closed. Are they upset about it? No, nothing happens, not until there's more publicity. The whole story stinks as far as saying that he was a communist. That's what one of the newspaper articles said. It says he was a card-carrying communist and that he was proud of being a communist. Lee didn't even join the Communist Party when he was in the USSR. Didn't do it. And how did he get away with that? Any ideas? Lee wasn't stupid. You know what he said? He said, if I join the Communist Party, he said, then all those communists out there are not going to believe me if I say I'm an American citizen who left the United States to become a communist, because all of you know what communism is here. It's, you know, you're miserable.
No.
So I can't do that, because anybody coming to the United States, seeing how you guys are living, they're using no newspaper for toilet paper. Okay? He said, I've got money galore. Yeah, he said, I had nowhere to spend. I couldn't buy meat. There wasn't any. So, you know, this is, so I can't join. And when he's in the United States, he writes a letter, because now he's posing, see, as pro-Castro, writes a letter to the Communist Party, says, I want to become a member. They never sent him anything. I think they knew more about him than almost anybody. All right, now, in other words, about Lee's handler, I hope I've said plenty. Lee was handled. He found out in the end who that was a handler is responsible for someone's actions. The person who is being handled may not even know they're being handled, or they may not know the identity. They may not know how important that person is. David Atlee Phillips wasn't just anybody. He became the head of all the operations in the Western world for the CIA eventually. And at that time, he's Mexico City in Mexico, all the Central and South America propaganda and all that. The man even looked into David Ferry's work over at Belchase. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about David Ferry. People have asked me, how did Lee learn his information? How did he penetrate the assassination ring? And why would he? It started in New Orleans. This is why Jim Garrison went after Clay Shaw. Just to put a few little things together. Clay Shaw was a member and one of the big honchos of the International Trade Mart, which was influenced greatly by the CIA support. They had a lot going on. Clay Shaw, Trade Mart. Kennedy was on his way to the Trade Mart when he was killed. That's where he was headed. Number 3, 9/11, the buildings that were down with a trademark. Did you know that? Put these things together, where it goes right to the present. These people are still among us. And if they're not, it's their boys that they've groomed. We had an unescapable coup d'etat. And that's the bottom line. Lee is in New Orleans. He is posing as pro-Castro. But the insiders know who he is. And Lee told me on the 27th of July, the day after he spoke at Spring Hill in Mobile, Alabama, that he was afraid that he was going to die. He said, I'm no good, working for the Soviets, meaning, pretending to be a spy against the U.S. and being a double agent. He said, I'm no good here in the U.S. because I didn't come back in a coffin. He said, if I come back in a coffin, that would have been just fine. They would have trusted me. Yeah, so he had this great sense of humor,
He did right.
Yeah, but since he didn't come back in a coffin, he was supposed to go to college and all kinds of things. They wouldn't let him advance. And when he was really turned down for advancement, when he was there at the Spring Hill thing, he realized that he didn't want me to be involved anymore. We'd fallen in love. I literally injured myself because I was so angry. He said, there are things I can't tell you. Recently, someone I think who was associated with CIA, I was talking to my publisher about it and to Dr. John Williams, approached me and he said, well, Lee Oswald, you don't know everything about him. I don't think he told you everything. I think he probably lied to you about this, that, and the other. And while that's possible, I know at one point he did. There were, after certain things that happened in our life, we had such an intense relationship. First of all of you know what honeypot is? What's a honeypot? Well, among spies, and you see it on James Bond movie, you see these beautiful girls moving in, and they get information from the spies. Well, if they can get information from a spy, okay, and it's considered valuable, does that mean that Lee would not give me information, for heaven's sakes? In other words, you have to look at it from that viewpoint. I had a lot of things in common with him. I had the strength as a woman to do almost anything with him. I was willing to do it. I said, let's go in it. I don't care if he wanted to go all the way down, as George and Wardshell had done, all the way down into Central South America. He wanted to go to Merida. He wanted to see a lot of things. He wanted to write. He wanted to be a social scientist. He wanted to be a writer of science fiction. I did too. I was writing science fiction myself. More than anything, I wanted to have adventure just like he did. And we didn't realize the pitiful condition of our country and the need our country had for us in certain ways. I mean, because we were young. And we cared about our country a great deal. It turned out that Lee cared about his country so much he gave his life for it. Here's what happened. He comes back and he wants to prove himself, so he's willing to. First, he was sent sort of to spy on the project that we were working on. We were working on a biological weapon. People, in the 1970s, we could have cured cancer. I know even today, if I could get put in a lab, I could point the way and we could cure soft tissue cancers probably 5 or 6 years from now. But I'm not allowed in. I was kicked out. I was kicked out because I objected to using prisoners, at least one prisoner, who was turned out to be healthy. At first they told me he had a terminal disease. Turned out not to be true. And I was told that it's okay. I mean, he's a prisoner and he's volunteered, but he was on death row, so it doesn't make any difference. The man was volunteering for something that if it worked, it would kill him. I could not go there. I wrote a note of protest to Dr. Ochsner. Actually went all the way to where I wasn't supposed to go, to his office. There was an old biddy sitting there for the nurse. The pretty one he usually had was on vacation, and she goes, what's this, And I said, well, I want you to give this to Dr. Ochsner. It's something. She said, is it urgent? I said, yes. She opens it up and reads it over the intercom. Oh, he's in surgery. Out comes, it is not correct to subject a prisoner to a disease that is going to kill him. It's not ethically right, Dr. Ochsner. Yeah, that was the end of me.
Yeah.
And that's how it happened. I wanted to cure cancer. My grandma died of cancer. I am watching and looking, and I'm looking at the big pharma, and I'm seeing the same primitive ways of trying to handle cancer. They cut you, they burn you, radiation, and they poison you with chemo. And then you're likely going to die anyway. They make a lot of money in between.
Yeah,
May they boil in hell.
that's right.
I'm telling you, they could have cured cancer a long time ago. And I don't care if they cut my head off for telling you they know how to do it. But it isn't profitable.
That's right.
In fact, what they're basically doing anyway for all your diseases is they're treating the symptoms instead of treating the cause. They're going to give you something for pain instead of finding out what made the pain.
Right.
This is over and over again because it makes a lot of money. And you're suffering. And I think that we had a big change that this came about, and my dad is half German, so don't think this is anti-German or something like that, but Operation Paperclip brought over at least 40,000 scientists and doctors all together over the years. From Germany and associated areas like Austria. And their ideas were to put everything in the clinics. And instead of having doctors go from door to door and help people individually, no, let's have them come to the clinics. And that was the beginning of dissociating the doctor with his patient. Instead, you became a statistic. It's heartbreaking for me to see the result, the sufferings, and how much money you have to pay. Do you realize I was forced overseas for talking like this, all right? And I have to live there if I want to keep what's left of my vision and my health. And I've been treated wonderfully by those people there. They protect me and everything. It's been wonderful. Thank God for them. But I had to notice that in Sweden, I'm going to use that example, but it's throughout Scandinavia, 5 weeks of vacation is the law. Free medical care. My friend George had cancer. They had to take out part of his stomach, his intestines, because he put it off. He didn't want to go. Okay, but he finally had to. He was in the hospital 6 weeks. It took him a year to recover. They protected his job. They trained people in his job, you know, kids and things like that, till he could come back. Took his job up again. I said, George, how much did it cost you for your treatment, your cancer treatment, and all this? And you know, they treated you for a year, and now you're healthy and you're okay. And he said, well, I said, I hear it didn't cost you anything. Oh, he said, yeah, it did. Well, I said, how much did it cost? He said, it cost me $1.25 a day to rent the TV set. Yes, to rent the TV set. And free college education. Look what they've done to you here. Your kids are loaded down, saddled down with maybe 30 years of debt just to go to college when it's free overseas. You're going to have a terminal illness or some big illness. My own mother said, I'm going to die at home because if I go to the hospital, there won't be any inheritance left for my kids. She died in bed instead so that we could have an inheritance. And that inheritance wasn't that much, but it was enough that I could get a home and some safe places to live overseas. My mother gave up chances to have her pain alleviated and everything in a hospital. Now what do you think? Don't you think it's time that you change things? You think you can't do anything? Are you helpless? Why don't you start telling your leaders about the way it is overseas? They're going to say, oh, that's socialism. It's called social democracy. 10 political parties in Sweden. 82% of the people vote. They vote because they're the ones in charge of their government. Oh, they say, oh, the taxes are high. I want to tell you, once you put your health insurance costs in, your taxes are higher. Absolutely.
That's right.
So I'm just throwing that in, but things could have been better. 5 universities right now, independent. The government wants to cure cancer over there. They don't want to have to, pay for all this stuff. 5 universities over there are working on a cure for cancer right now, using genes, genetic approach. It's very interesting. In our country, when I said and wrote to different clinics, I said, look, bacteriophage is the way to go. You don't even know what bacteriophage is. Anybody here know what bacteriophage are? Yes.
As a cancer survivor, I'm with you.
All right. All right. Bacteriophage is a virus. It looks like a mosquito, sort of. You blew it up. It's got a little stinger, like, you know, in these legs, and a little pile here of RNA sticking on top, and you can manipulate this to make it attack whatever you want. It attacks, at this point, bacteria. It also can learn or be genetically manipulated to attack cancer in your body. And they're using it. They're using bacteriophage, but they don't want to use the bacteriophage itself because that's cheap. You could be cured for about $30,000 using a bacteriophage that is just selected for your cancer. Instead, they're using the bacteriophage, filling the bacteriophage in a little pouch, and it delivers chemotherapy, chemo packets, nano packets to the cancer to kill the cancer because that makes money.
No.
That's what they're doing to you, and you need to know. If I get my head chopped off tomorrow, don't think it was by a Muslim. All right. Now, there are so many things I could tell you about Lee, and I hope you get the book May and Lee. I have the documentation, I have the witnesses, and it's taken 14 years, but more and more people are listening because I'm still here. Why? Because I loved him. And love is stronger than hate. Love is stronger than all the threats. It's stronger than somebody calling in the middle of the night saying your mother has died. Stronger than all that. Stronger than some of my kids who won't have anything to do with me. Because I care about you. I care about this country. I want you to spread the word. Lee Oswald didn't kill Kennedy. Far from it. He tried to save him. In our last conversation, Lee told me, and how, of course, I did tell you how he penetrated the group, and that had to do with David Ferrie. And I need to explain that. David Ferrie was a wonderful pilot. He knew 5 languages, modern languages. He also knew Latin and Greek and all that. On top of that, he had a big mouth. David Ferrie stood in front of a group of a little bit bigger than this, well, there were 70 retired officers there. They were Army officers. They were military men. And this is right after the Bay of Pigs, and he had trained young men that he saw get captured and tortured by Castro in the Bay of Pigs. And he said, some people think that Kennedy ought to be shot. And they made him leave the stage. They said, well, talk over here about it, not to everybody. Well, among those retired people that were sitting there were some important military officers. And they were involved with others who wanted Kennedy dead, and they loved what David Ferrie had to say. And they said, Dave, come on over here. Come here. Come on, Dave. Hey, you know, you can be a good pilot for us. We can use you. You can, get things. We can work with Dallas. We can work with the oil men. Oxner was the same way. There's so much I could have told you about how I came to New Orleans, how I was got involved in all this. It's in the book. I wish I had more time to tell you, but it's documented. I was going to try and cure cancer. Anyway, I got to know David Ferrie, and how that happened, of course, is in the David Ferrie book. But what's important is Dave got involved with people, including Dr. Oxner and others who wanted to see Kennedy dead. Dr. Alton Oxner is so popular, poor Jim Garrison even couldn't, he wanted to arrest him and couldn't. It's even in Oxner's own biography, his official biography, that Jim Garrison wanted to arrest him as a suspect in the murder of Kennedy. Couldn't go anywhere, just like he couldn't do anything about Carlos Marcello if he wanted to keep his family alive in Dallas. I mean, in New Orleans. There's just nothing he could do. But here's the problem. David Ferrie changed. While he's telling everybody he hates Kennedy, he finally learns about what we call today the 13 days in October, the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Kennedy saved our lives. All right, and people who don't know that, you need to find out. Watch the movie 13 Days, so you'll know what John F. Kennedy and his brother did, and they're dead because of what they did. Because we had treasonous generals, we had treasonous warriors out there who their only solution to this war. Do you notice that Obama is sending troops to Africa to build infrastructure for people over there because of the Ebola virus, instead of hiring native Africans there to do that kind of work, no, we solve everything with our troops. We send our boys and girls over there and they can get their legs blown off, but that's okay. We just have to solve everything by, using military because that makes money. Money has become God in this country. If you don't think so, the dollar bill should say, "In money we trust." It really should. So David Ferry has been invited into these. He's useful as a pilot. He does work for them. He becomes a mafia pilot for Carlos Marcello. He learns things. He and Lee, as you'll find out in my book and also the new one, the Me and Lee book and the David Ferry, have become close friends. He tells Lee what's going on. Lee volunteers to penetrate the group, and he is smart, and he does it. And he dies for it. He did his best to try to save Kennedy. We have not, when I said this back in 1999, people said, oh, I know that Lee Oswald, was framed, he was innocent and all that, but come on, he didn't try to save Kennedy's life. I mean, nobody's going to believe me now, because enough material has come out. We know that Lee had an FBI informant number, for example. We know for a fact that telex that John Delane Williams is telling you about, that was sent on the 17th of November, okay? That was a Sunday. And I was on the phone with him. He was telling me how hard it was for him to get away, and it dropped. I had to call him on a Wednesday, so I talked to him the last time, 37 and a half hours before the assassination. He was in so deep by then, but he had tried his best to warn. He sent it to the FBI. He knew how bad the CIA was. He didn't think the FBI would betray. They did. John Edgar Hoover knew what he was about. J. Edgar Hoover, 4.5 hours after Lee Oswald is arrested, the November 22nd arrest, right after Kennedy was shot the same day, he answers an inquiry that is sent to him from Dallas from his own FBI agents. And they're saying, look, somebody put out wanted for treason posters all over. Shouldn't we look into that? Somebody's put this ad in the paper with a black border around it, which is what you do for a death notice. Shouldn't we do that? And especially, we're interested in this guy up here who hates Kennedy, and they burn crosses. They've got a group. And Hoover writes, it's only 4.5 hours after Lee was arrested. The evidence, the rifles haven't even got to Washington yet. He puts true subject found not necessary in big letters and signs his initials to it. So the FBI had the case solved before the evidence even reached their offices and FBI offices in Washington, D.C. Now, what are you going to do about something like that? The odds were against Lee all the way on every angle. Perhaps if Lee had known, or we had known, that Hoover and Lyndon Johnson lived across the street from each other for 30 years, it might have made a difference. It was in Washington. Lyndon Johnson, from the elegance and magnificence of Kennedy, we got Lyndon Johnson, who showed reporters his penis and called it jumbo. That's what we got. Okay? That's what we got in place of Kennedy. And that's how crude and callous he was, if you only knew. We have Lyndon Johnson ducking. We've got photographs. He's ducking down as the cavalcade, the motorcade goes around the corner. He is down before the first shot is being fired. He is down with a walkie-talkie in his hand. Lee Oswald tried to save Kennedy's life. And finally, Abraham Bolden, after I'd said, Lee told me that he thought he saved Kennedy's life a few weeks earlier. Abraham Bolden, and I visited him in Chicago, I've met him face to face, when he tried to tell people, the Secret Service, where they had gone wrong, and he was the first Secret Service black agent. And Kennedy himself had picked him out for the Kennedy detail. When Abraham Bolden tried to say what the Secret Service had done wrong, and they, by the way,
Watch
they
the power.
turned it off.
Back and forth.
You turned off my mic.
Everything.
Why'd you do that?
Well, I've turned off the signal, I'm sorry. It'll come back on.
Well, yeah.
Is that working?
It'll
Is
take
it
a little
working?
bit.
was just getting ready to go over there.
We came here pretty well.
Yeah, I wanted to get to the David Ferry stuff just now.
It was warm, so it'll take a little while for it to come back up.
Was it too hot?
Huh?
Well,
We can hear you.
okay,
Speak
yeah,
up.
I'm trying. Okay, where was I?
You're talking about Bolton.
Yes, Abraham Bolden. Abraham Bolden and we talked about this. Abraham was present when the FBI called the Secret Service and said, hey, we've had a problem here. You need to know about this. Here in Chicago, we've had to arrest some armed men, okay, because they were going to shoot Kennedy. We've arrested them. Kennedy has just barely stopped from getting on the plane to go to Chicago. And Abraham said, they said the name of the man who told them the information was named Lee. That is my Lee. And they had to kill him just 2 days after he was arrested in front of 70 police officers using a mafia nightclub owner who was better known as a bagman, somebody I knew and met, somebody who didn't want to do it, somebody who called and said, we're going to kill this man if you bring him out tomorrow, which they did. You have Will Fritz, the head of the police department there. He's walking in front of Lee. He moves aside. The horn goes off. Jack Ruby rushes forward. I can't see on the TV. I'm watching on the TV. I can't see his face, so I didn't know it was him. Shoots Lee. I can hear the scream of Lee. I was crying. Without cry.
The microphone's back on.
It's back on? Okay. Well, anyway, you could hear the cry that Lee made. And I could hear it. And I probably could see more of his face than any one of you could, because it was his face that I could focus on it. So I could actually see the pain on his face as he went down. I could see it somehow, some of it, just enough. And I screamed. But what really gets me is when I looked later and I could see that Will Fritz had moved aside. And when the shot went off, his head didn't turn. Everybody else's did. He didn't turn his head to see where those shots came from or what was going on. Will Fritz, aren't you something? And Jim Lavelle, everybody loves Uncle Jim. You know, he's a nice guy. And you look upset. Are you? Is everything okay? What I'm saying? Are you all right, sir? You. I'm asking you. No, this gray-haired man right here who's got his arms folded. What are you thinking, sir?
I'm listening.
Okay. Is there anything you're objecting to?
Sorry?
Is there anything that you object to that I'm saying?
No.
All right. I look at body language, but I can't see very well anymore. So, I've got like tunnel vision, funnel cake vision. It's kind of creamy around the outsides. Anyway, poor Lee was shot. Dave called me. He told me that when they put him in the ambulance, that they weren't kind to him in there. And I desperately looked for stuff. I found a receipt for the ambulance, and it showed they had oxygen on board, and they didn't give him any oxygen. And they say they weren't prejudiced, but when they rolled him into Parkland, they put him in trauma room 1. They said, oh no, we can't have him in here. That's where Kennedy was, treated and died. And they rolled him out again and put him in a different room. All the time he's bleeding to death. They didn't want him to live. They're saying they weren't prejudiced, then why did they roll him out of trauma room 1? Anyway, then I looked at his autopsy. I could see 5 cuts on his left arm, huge bruise under his here. Worst of all, and we've got the pictures in the new book of his feet. You can see 3 marks like that, and they fit exactly with a cattle prod.